Coming up on this episode of Everyone Has a Voice.
One day I was walking through my family room and quiet in the house, kids at school, husband, at work. And I heard God say, your mother was not the first person who left you to just be loved by my own mother and father. That was really all I wanted.
Silenced by her own sin over a decade ago, she believes in giving everyone a voice. She's an author, speaker, mentor, and voice for the underdog. Be inspired by radical stories of change that prove you could be one different choice away from a better tomorrow. Welcome to the show that proves them wrong. This is Everyone Has a Voice with Christy Neal, brought to you by Choose Different Ministries.
Welcome. We are super excited today to have author, speaker, and teacher Michelle Moore with us. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, we are so excited. So today we're going to be talking about abandonment to forgiveness.
Yes.
And so you have written a book called Abandonment to Forgiveness.
Yes. Yeah, a little miniature book that came from my God Crazy Freedom team. And it's got a little Bible study, and it's like a little miniature book. And so it's really good because it just kind of highlights my story, but then also has that Bible study in there.
Wonderful. So how did the vision for this book come about?
You know how you hear all these stories about how people do all these book proposals and they send them out to all these publishers? Well, that did not happen for me. So
that did not happen.
I was a contributing author for a book called God Crazy Freedom, and a publisher found out about the 20 of us women, and we were doing women's conferences throughout the country at the time.
Awesome.
And a publisher out of California, Aspire Press, they heard about it, and I was actually the first person they called. So it was, we've heard about your story. We want to talk with you about a book deal.
That is amazing. So that alone speaks to how many people deal with relationships and abandonment.
Yes.
And then struggling to forgive.
Yeah.
Is writing your childhood story therapeutic, or did it open up old wounds for you?
When it came to writing my story about being abandoned, by my parents as a child, and just really my journey of forgiving, it was one of those things where at that point I had done quite a bit of healing.
Yes.
Thank goodness, because it would have been unbearable to write something so painful if I was still in a real pain-stricken kind of place.
That's right.
But because I had really done so much of that healing, God really took a hold of me, I always say, and just really led me down the path marked forgiveness. It was a process, but by the time I was through it, and then all of a sudden the book stuff started coming, literally.
Wow.
Like I heard God one day, I was walking through my family room, and I heard in my spirit, now I can use you.
Wow.
And I look back now and kind of laugh because I'm like, I had no idea what that meant.
You're like, okay, for what?
Oh, okay, I'll go do the dishes now.
Are you going to use me in the kitchen? Okay, so share, how old were you, and were you close with your parents beforehand?
My father by the time I was 5, my parents had married and divorced twice. And so from 5 on until 14, I only saw my father one time. He lived in another state, didn't come see me. He would send a Christmas gift, a birthday gift, and would, usually call a couple of times a year. And then at 14, my mother vanished. And just really what I say is fell off the face of the earth. My mother was my best friend. I loved her. We were extremely close. Wow. In fact, my son now, my older son, Dylan, he's 14 right now, and I look at him sometimes and I think, gosh, I just couldn't imagine a day, without him, much less just walking out of his life. She and I were so close. I think that was a lot of it, was just we were so close.
Yeah, and I think, too, people think that when others abandoned folks, that, they must not have a good bond. They must not have had a good relationship, and that's not always the case. And I'm like you, my daughter's 14 right now. I absolutely could not imagine the thought of that.
Yeah, and I'm an only child. So, it was one of those things where I think a lot of times, too, women kind of do this where when there is a divorce and it's the woman and especially a daughter, they tend to treat that only child like a friend or a best friend. And I mean, my mother was, but my best friend, she was the cool mom. My friends loved her. In fact, I have a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine that always has said, out of all my friends' moms, like yours would have been the absolute last one ever that I would have ever thought would do something like this.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but I looked for her. She had what we call now, back then, this was, I'm dating myself a little bit, but this was before identity theft was a term. And so, but she committed identity theft. She really was able to just fall off the face of the earth. And so everything I had done in efforts to look for her ended up just being fruitless because she wasn't going by her name. She wasn't going by her Social Security number. She wasn't using that. Nothing that had anything to do with the real her was
she was ahead of her time. She was very ingenious in that.
Yeah.
So what made you choose to forgive her instead of just putting that wall up? Because I have people in my circle that they tend to just put a wall up and say, you know what, you're dead to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah. One night I was on my sofa in the family room crying, and my husband was trying to console me, and I was really just inconsolable. I was really upset over my family not treating me like family.
Sure.
And just wanting to belong. I think we all have kind of that innate thing where we want to belong. And here I am with, my father and his family not treating me like family once again, which was kind of the story of my life. And so my husband had been talking with me, and he'd gotten up at one point to leave the room. I think he ran to the restroom or whatever. And all of a sudden I was sitting on the sofa, and I just heard clear as day in my spirit, I heard just this very stern but low voice, say, you were not even grateful for what you have. I was defiant, and I was like, grateful for what? And I proceeded to have 3 visions. God showed me 3 visions. The first one was my home. God and I knew that I had specifically been praying when some things worked out to where we were able to have the home that we, really my dream home that I wanted.
Yeah.
And he kind of put he did put an explanation point on it. And the timing, everything is amazing. But, I absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt that God answered my prayer on that. And then he showed me my husband and showed me, and reminded me of my friends and family that, haven't really ever met the one or had such a hard time struggling to meet the right person. And, tried all this stuff for love. And then, and showed me like, oh, he changed more diapers for Carson, our younger son, probably than I did. And
oh, wow.
What a good husband.
That's a blessing.
And then God showed me my kids. I could hear them in the room next to me, and I could hear them laughing. They were playing the Wii at the time. And he just reminded me they both ended up in Vanderbilt at the NIC unit. They were both very sick when they were born, and here they are now perfect, just absolutely perfect.
Healthy kids.
And he's like, you have all these things. And really it was about you have all these things to be grateful for. And I just all of a sudden felt like I could see myself coming out of myself and turning around and seeing myself sitting there on the sofa. And I was just in this moment just disgusted all of a sudden with myself. And I was like, what am I doing? Odds are my parents aren't sitting on their sofas crying about what they had or hadn't done, or what they had missed or what they hadn't gotten to see or whatever. And I thought, I was just all of a sudden felt such disgust about my behavior. And really at the end of the day, it was a daughter just trying and wanting and grieving for what had been stolen, but still as an adult, as a mother, as a wife in my 30s, still crying and grieving for what had been stolen from me. It was, and I was hurting and I was still grieving. Something's got to change.
Yes.
I'm just going to keep doing this if something doesn't change. It was over a period of the next quite a few months where it was, it was probably about, I think about 6 to 8 months where God just took a hold of me, and I say he led me down a path marked forgiveness. I didn't know that's what I needed to do.
Yes.
But the first thing was that night when he said, you're not even grateful for what you have. Wow. And then he really started to show me gratitude. And so there are 4 kind of benchmarks that I say God kind of took a hold of me and as he led me down that path. And so the first one was gratitude. And it went on for a few months where one day I was standing on the back of my back covered porch, and it was raining, and there were these huge drops of rain coming down, and I'm out on the back porch crying with just, I'm just so grateful, and the rain's so beautiful. And I'm like, what in the world is going on with me,
What a shift. Yes.
And I hated it when it rained growing up and all the way up to that day. It was like, I hated rain because I have natural curly hair and it'd be humid, It was kind of a vanity.
I understand.
Yeah. And so it was like that, so, or just, now, great, I'm going to have to worry about getting wet, or I have to think about what shoes I'm going to wear, all these different things. And so that was the first thing. And then one morning I got up, and I just, for about a month, I just had this undeniable, unexplainable, just, need to understand grace. And it was like one day I just got up and said, what is grace? What is grace? What is grace? What is grace?
Yes.
I started asking people, what is grace? I started, digging in the Bible about grace and reading about grace and just researching and Googling and grace. And then about a month later, it was one morning I woke up and it was the same thing all over again, but it was mercy. And it was like, well, what's mercy? What's the difference between grace and mercy? And then God started calling me to ask a family member for forgiveness.
Okay.
And I didn't tell a single soul because I knew my husband and my friends would think I'd lost my mind. What God showed me was when you know better, you're expected to do better. And regardless of what she did and what happened and how she treated you or things that happened, that's beside the point. I'm asking you to ask for forgiveness for your part. The opportunity presented itself, and when it happened, I knew it immediately, like, oh, this is getting ready to happen. And then it just all led to just forgiving. Really, ultimately, when I knew I had forgiven my parents was when I sat down on my knees in my bedroom one morning and just tried to pray for my mother.
Wow.
And I knew that.
How did that feel when you were trying to pray for her?
The first day, all I could do was cry.
Yeah.
And I could not really say anything other than, God, you know my heart. And then the next morning, I tried again, sat on the floor, of my bedroom crying and just crying out to God. I knew that nobody else was probably praying for her. If I wasn't, then who would be?
Exactly.
And so I had no words.
Mm-hmm.
And all I could say is, God, you know my heart, and just cry out to God. All I did was just, sobbing and weeping. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, the third morning, I was on the floor of my bedroom again, no one home again, early in the morning after taking the kids to school, and same time, every day about. And I just cried out again and was like, God, you know my heart. And it just kind of broke through, and I was able to start praying for her. It wasn't as hard for my father.
You were kind of used to him always being gone, right? And you weren't as close to him.
Yeah, and we talk about abandonment. One day I was walking through my family room and quiet in the house, kids at school, husband, at work, and I heard God say, your mother was not the first person who left you. It was just like this. I just broke out into tears, and in my spirit it was like, just because you knew he was alive and you knew his address and his phone number, didn't mean he was there for you.
Yeah.
He wasn't there emotionally. He wasn't there physically. I remember when I would talk to him a couple of times a year, I would always cry. Or if I got a letter, I would cry because it was just, he would spend a couple of minutes on the phone and then he'd start complaining about his phone bill. And so you're talking about only just a couple of times a year,
That's gut-wrenching.
And I just really wanted to just be loved by my own mother and father. That was really all I wanted. And so...
and so many people take that love from their parents for granted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is such a powerful, powerful story. How do you trust and open yourself up to people after you've experienced such deep hurt and abandonment from someone so close to you?
I think what happens is, it's kind of that innocent until proven guilty. And so you have to, otherwise you're bitter. I think that's kind of where bitterness is. It's like, oh, well, and I had to recognize too, like self-fulfilling prophecy. When my husband and I first got together, I think probably for the first couple of years, I would think to myself, well, it's just a matter of time before he leaves me too.
Yes.
And so a friend of mine said to me one day, have you ever heard of self-fulfilling prophecy? And I was like, yes. And it just stopped me dead in my tracks. And I immediately saw what I had been doing. And, it wasn't something I necessarily said to him. I think I might have said it a couple of times in the middle of an argument or whatever, like, well, it's just a matter of time before you leave me too. But I really did think that because that's all I had seen.
That's all you knew.
Yeah, from all family. What does that look like, when you're married? And I just didn't know that permanency in any way.
Yeah, you didn't have the example of it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what do you tell your children about your parents, and are your parents in the picture?
Yeah, so my mother passed away a few years ago, and my father is not in the picture. Dylan is now 14, and the last time we saw him was Dylan's 5th birthday. And what I say to myself and what I say to my kids, this is a lesson I had to learn, and that is that I couldn't make my parents want to have a relationship with me.
That's so good.
And so I can't make them want to have a relationship with them. And they're the ones missing out, or my father is now. My mother missed out, of course. And I remember the day that the next morning after I had found out she passed away, and I remember Carson, my younger son, coming into the bathroom where I was standing, and he came in crying, and it was the first time I saw him, since finding out, and he had heard from my husband that my mother had passed away, and he came in there crying, and he hugged me, and he said, "I just never knew her," and he was crying for
for what he missed out on.
Yeah. But I think about that, and I think, man, they missed out, but man, it's the grandparents that really missed out.
The grandparents really missed out, because I know your boys personally, and they're fantastic.
Yeah.
I love them. So could you imagine ever being able to forgive without God in your life?
No.
Okay.
It takes God. It's one of those things I think of the flesh, like we just don't have it in us.
Because the human side is you're dead to me.
Eye for an eye.
Yeah, you hurt me, I'm gonna hurt you, and then
or you just hurting, and but it took God. It took God. And one day I was sitting in the family room in a chair, and this was just a life-changing moment. Forever I will be changed. But I saw a vision, and the vision was me in the woods, and the dirt was just beautiful. It looked like mulch, but it looked like I was going to take a few steps, and I'd be at the fork in the path. And I sensed God to the left. And then I sensed that to the right was really everything I had already been doing, and it wasn't working. And it was the world and the world's view of what my situation was, and all of that. And then it was like, but if you just come with me this way to the left, if you just try something new and you just let all that go and don't look at what they say. Oh, yes. I wouldn't give my mother 2 cents or 2 seconds or this or that. And you have every right to be upset and to be poor you. And it was like, or you can forgive her. Yeah. And you can come with me.
I love that.
And in that moment, I just knew, like, I just surrendered it all. And I have never looked back. My life has never been the same.
Wow.
So a few months later, I was standing in my office, and I could hear the kids outside laughing and running around. And I'm standing in the middle of my office, and I was like, what is this feeling I'm feeling? What is this feeling I'm feeling? What is this? And then I realized it was joy.
Oh, wow.
That's a fruit of the Spirit.
Yes.
I really felt like I was hurting so much that you can't even be grateful, and you can't experience what God really, the fullness of what God has for you.
Like a dark cloud just hovering over you everywhere you go.
Yeah. And when I did that, I remember telling Jeff, I'm changed. Something's different. Something's different. And what Jeff, after a few months, Jeff said, something is different.
That's wonderful.
You know, I see it. But, you know, we know there's been a transformation a lot of times before anybody else can see it or experience it. But Jeff had spent years coming and finding me in a bedroom crying after we'd opened gifts with the kids. And, you know, it was just another thing, another holiday, another, you know, monumental moment or whatever. It was a lot of pain. It was like you said, that dark cloud that's over your head everywhere you walk. And it was just, I had to let it go and say, okay, I was still grieving for the childhood I was never going to get.
Exactly.
And it just, I had to let that go and just give it to God. And what's amazing is that God uses it, you know, whether it's the speaking, the books. Yeah. So now I understand when he says, now I can
use you.
Yeah.
I think this is so important because so many people have experienced abandonment and deep hurts, and knowing that forgiveness is a choice, and God actually commands us to forgive.
Yes.
But it's for us.
Yeah.
So we can be free because there's nothing that the devil would love better than for us to be stuck in our hurt and our woe is me, and why didn't I have this, and why did this, you know, happen to me? And so if we're stuck, if we're a statue, God can't bless a statue. So I love that you were able to forgive, and now you're using your voice to help so many. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you choose anything different? Would you forgive faster?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't even know until he, you know, said that when I was sitting on the sofa. So I would say, you know, I know that things happen in the way they should. I look back at all of the years of pain, but I didn't recognize it as unforgiveness. It was because to me, it was really yearning for, you know, what I had missed and hoping for tomorrow to be different or today to be different, really.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that. I would just say that, you know, just praise God that I found him.
Yes.
I sit on that couch, something's got to change. I'm like, what in the world am I doing? I remember saying with such disgust like that to myself. And, you know, and I was like, I've got to change. Something's got to change. But I didn't know what it was. Yeah. I didn't even recognize it was unforgiveness. But what I heard was, you're not even grateful for what you have.
So gratitude can be the antidote.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
Unforgiveness.
It starts with gratitude. Because when you're so busy looking at what you don't have, it's hard to appreciate what you do have.
Yes.
And so that's why he was showing me those 3 visions. You know, looking back now, I'm like, oh my goodness, that moment on that sofa was monumental. Wow. It was the beginning of, a complete transformation.
Wow. Okay, so for anyone who may be listening and they're facing this exact same situation, what wisdom nugget would you like to leave them with?
Focus on the relationship with God and what God says, not what other people say. And remember, too, that you can't hold on to unforgiveness and say, okay, I'm going to forgive that person when they've apologized or when they've earned it, or, you know what, it is a command. Forgiveness is a command. What I didn't understand for so long was that when I forgave my parents, and even teaching forgiveness now and writing and speaking about it, I help people understand, like, you genuinely need to forgive for yourself.
Yes.
And so because it set me free in a way that I could experience joy, I could experience the fullness. That was not what was between me and God anymore. But I didn't even know it was between us. I just knew I was in hurt. I was in a pain. It wasn't something that I had done. It was something that had been done to me.
Yeah, you didn't choose it.
Yeah, I didn't choose it. But I was still grieving for that love and that, just rejection. Abandonment is rejection.
Yeah.
Ask God to give you the heart that He has for people. Sitting down to pray for my parents. I mean, I don't think that if you can't pray for the person who's hurt you, you haven't forgiven them.
That's exactly right. That's a wonderful point. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing. That was so powerful. How can people find you and follow you?
Yeah, you can always go to michelleministries.com. Michelle has 2 L's. So michelleministries.com. And then, of course, I'm on Facebook, so you can always find me on there, too. But easy to find. You can always email me, too, from there, from that
Thank
website.
you so much for being on, and thank you for listening. And remember, you could be one different choice away from a better tomorrow. Forgive.
Need more Christy in your life? Watch her weekly Transparent Tuesday videos by visiting ChooseDifferent.org. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for Everyone Has a Voice with Christy Neal. Brought to you by Choose Different Ministries.